podcast of the Empower Period series. Just to give you a bit of background, Empower Period is an initiative that's been set up by Irise International. My name's Acushla and I'm the advocacy coordinator at Irise. And what we do is that we work towards creating a world where no one is held back by their period. We're fighting for period equality for all people with periods. As part of the Empower Period project, we're doing these podcasts for people to have something to engage with at home whilst we're in lockdown and whilst we're not really allowed outside very much. Just a sort of a nice safe space for people to come together to talk about their experience of menstruation. And one key part of this is that we really want to promote diversity. We really want to give a platform to voices that need to be heard and deserve to be heard. And so for this podcast specifically, we're going to be focusing on the experience of invisible disability within menstruation. And so from that, I want to introduce Maria and Pippa. Maria, do you want to just say like who you are and why you're here?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. So I'm Maria Tomlinson, or Dr. T for short, and I'm a Leverhulme Early Career Research Fellow at the University of Sheffield in the Department of Journalism Studies. That basically means that I'm doing my very own research project, which is really exciting. And it's about menstruation in the media, focusing particularly on period stigma and period poverty. And I also do some teaching as well on gender and feminism in media. And recently I've been collaborating with Irise on their Empower Period project, giving some advice about language to use, how to approach young people, because I'm doing research on young people in schools. And also I've been helping to produce these podcasts.
I'm Pippa Line. I am an ordinary person, not a doctor, not a charity worker. Well, I volunteer for a couple of charities, entirely unrelated to any of this. And I live with chronic illness. It took me a while to reconcile that actually these chronic illnesses are disabling for me. And they impact my life to such a degree that it is a disability. Yeah, it's quite nerve-wracking to talk about this, knowing that I'm being recorded and this is a thing that people are going to hear. But fire your questions at me, and I'm happy to share anything and everything. I mean, it's important for me to state that I'm only representing my own experience of chronic illness and invisibility disabilities. I can't represent all invisible disabilities, and certainly not all disabilities, because they come in so many different forms, sensory disabilities, impairments in movement and walking and such like. For me, the main impact of my illness is in terms of fatigue and widespread pain and cognitive impairment. So I have ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome. I have fibromyalgia. I have the exciting combination of anxiety and depression, and I also experience IBS. And all the cluster of things that tends to co-occur together. So the biggest impact on my life is that really disabling fatigue that limits the amount of productive hours I have in a day. Very, very small. So you're lucky to get me.
Could you maybe explain to our audience who don't know about it what fibromyalgia is?
Okay, fibromyalgia it's known as kind of a chronic, widespread pain condition. For me, it's an experience of a deep ache in my bones. Different people experience it in different ways. They can get paresthesias, so tingling, itching, numbness, and it's thought to be neurological in origin, so nerve rather than the actual muscle tissue. There isn't any damage. It's theorized to be the nerves becoming hypersensitive and experiencing pain all the time. But it's not fully understood yet. All we know is it's literally a pain in the neck.
Yeah, perfect. I just want say, like, thank you so much for coming and being so open about everything that you've experienced, because we're really hoping that this will speak to a lot of people who have invisible disabilities, who may not class themselves as disabled because they might not look disabled, but in fact, as you said, if it's impacting your life and you find it debilitating, it's stopping you from living the life that you want to do, then you are well within your right to identify as that. So thank you for like exploring and sharing that with us.
Oh, you're very welcome. I mean, the thing about the term disability is we have a preconceived idea in our mind of what it looks like, which is reinforced by the signs we might see on toilets or parking spaces. But under the law, a disability, you know, is something that impacts your ability to live and work. And very, very many conditions are disabling. And that includes mental health conditions. It can include learning disabilities. It can include chronic illnesses, you name it. And a vast, vast number of those are not visible from the outside. And just because someone doesn't have a mobility aid or, you know, part of their body missing, it doesn't mean they're not experiencing something that is changing the quality of their life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd also like to add to that I also experience chronic illness. I don't think to the extent that you do, Pippa, and it doesn't debilitate my life, I don't think as much as you experience. But I just wanted to share that I also experience IBS, painful syndrome, and a joint disorder called osteochondritis dissecans, which basically means that my joints are hypermobile, and I've also got some holes within like the joint bones, and so I just wanted to share that as part of this podcast, so that if I was to chip in, people would know sort of my background. But yeah, so thank you so much for saying everything that you've just said.
Thanks to both.
That goes to exemplify that the same illness can be more or less disabling in different people. One person's experience of IBS could be entirely disabling, where they may not be able to leave the house because of how profoundly it's impacting them. And for other people, it may be that it flares up if they eat a particular thing or they're under particular stress, and they can manage it to the point where it doesn't have that impact on their life, that it's stopping them doing things, and they don't feel like it's a disability. I thought I'd talk a little bit about some language that's used to discuss chronic illnesses and invisible disabilities. There's something called the spoon theory, which was created by a lady called Christine Miserandino, who has lupus, which is a chronic systemic illness, which you may have heard about infamously from House and such like. It's never lupus, but for a lot of people it is. Ms. Miserandino was telling the story of how to explain to her friend what the experience of having a chronic illness was like. And she gave her friend a handful of spoons, demonstration I prepared earlier.
Great.
And said, okay, so this is the amount of energy you have for one day, and each thing you do takes one spoon off you. So let's go through your day. And my friend says, oh, I get up, and she said, okay, you get up. That's one spoon. That takes energy to get out of bed. She says, okay, well, I take a shower. Yeah, obviously, that's a spoon gone. Travel to work all day, and travel home from work. And next thing you know, where's all your energy gone? And for each person with an invisible illness or chronic illness or many, many conditions that affect how much energy you have, the spoon theory can exemplify how it can feel to live with that, because you start with a limited resource, and every activity, anything you do, you have to make choices, because you know you're not going to be able to do all the things you want to do. So for me, showers are an expensive spoon resource for me. It takes at least 2 of my daily spoons. And if I make myself lunch and have got dressed and got out of bed, then before you know it, just being up, dressed and clean and fed, I'm down to 1 spoon. What if I've got things to do? What if something unexpected happens? If I borrow spoons from tomorrow, what happens tomorrow? I could keep borrowing spoons, but eventually you're going to crash and you get a flare up in your illness, and it impacts for a more prolonged time, and you find yourself maybe with just 2 spoons a day for a long time, and it's really limits your life. And occasionally you get this.
A spork.
A fork. Oh yeah, that's just for days when I don't give a fork.
And I'm guessing things like having a period may mean that you start the day with fewer spoons than you would normally.
Yeah.
How does that affect you?
Yeah, we all know that periods can affect our energy levels. And the experience of pain, cramping, even diarrhea and vomiting for some people, headaches, that takes a lot out of you. And if you're starting the day with just a few spoons already, then if you take away a couple from your period, it becomes a really kind of disabling part of your life. And that's a reality for people with chronic illnesses, invisible illnesses, and many other conditions, is that a period, which can be rough enough for anyone, can be entirely wiping off days. If you've got a headache, if you get migraines with your period, it's not great.
No.
And of course, some people get the experience of anemia, which weakens them further. The overlap with IBS that a lot of people get with their periods.
Yeah, for example, with heart conditions who are on warfarin have heavier periods as well.
Precisely. And you find yourself really rationing the spoons, and it can have big impacts on your self-esteem, even how little you're able to do. So last week, when we were due to record the podcast, in a delightful exemplification of what we're discussing today, I woke up on the morning itself and discovered my period had unexpectedly started, immediately robbing me of most of my spoons. Not only that, but because it had unexpectedly started, I had stained bed sheets and stained legs. And I realised I needed to shower, I needed to change the bed sheets, and I needed to record a podcast. And I had energy for only one of those. And that's the kind of choice you've got to make, is, do I do this thing that I really want to do and feels really important to me? Do I make sure I have somewhere clean to sleep tonight? Or do I make sure my body's clean? Because I can't do all of them. And I'm fortunate enough that I've got a partner who is supportive and, change the bed sheets without a question. Not everyone's fortunate enough to have that. And yeah, it kind of gives you pause to think that something we may take for granted as, I had a leak overnight, just got to change the sheets, it's a pain in the arse. It could be a genuine matter of choice of someone's well-being.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know that we had a bit of a conversation last time that we spoke about the use of period products, and you brought up something really interesting about the use of menstrual cups, I think it was. And I wondered if you would just sort of explain that to our audience a bit, because it was something that even myself, as sort of a menstrual educator and someone who knows quite a lot about menstruation, had never even thought about. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a choice of period products to use, and menstrual cups are becoming increasingly popular as a progressive, environmentally friendly, sustainable product that you can reuse. And so yeah, it's becoming increasingly popular, but it's in many ways not that accessible. because you require a certain amount of manual dexterity to insert it. And the planning needed to sterilize it and clean it regularly. For example, conditions like dyspraxia and ADHD can affect someone's planning and short-term memory and organizational skills, which may make that impractical. If someone has such limited energy that, you know, they've got to choose between you know, cleaning certain things, they may not have the energy to sterilize it as it needs to be. And it's an invisible downside to the current tide towards more sustainable living is the fact that many disposable products are actually far more accessible for people with disabilities. So a lot of people have become aware of the discussion about straws and the fact that our classic plastic bendy straws, while they may be the scourge of the ocean and the killer of turtles, which no one argues, they are, for many people with disabilities, the only way they can access liquid when out in public. And if you issue a uniform ban on it and make people with disabilities have to ask to be able to access that, then you're creating yet another barrier in public. And it's slightly unfortunate that the public discussion doesn't seem to have really registered that the right to accessible life for disabled people is just as important as any other consideration here.
Yeah, I've noticed that narrative is missing in the menstrual activism that I've seen. Because menstrual cups are posited by menstrual activists as like the solution to everything. Well, in fact, if we think of a lot of homeless people with periods as well, a menstrual cup isn't suitable because where can you clean it? Where can you change it even?
I always used to use non-applicator tampons, and I used to think to myself, why do people use applicator tampons? It's just a tampon, you take it and you shove it up your vagina. You know, where's the complication in that? And that was coming from a place of privilege, of not understanding the limitations and difficulties some people might have. And any other reason. You don't need a reason to want to use a particular menstrual product. Your preference is fine. You don't have to justify it. But for many people, there is also a reason why they choose a particular one. So if they have limited manual dexterity and so on, I have had to move to applicator tampons because I can't open the shrink wrap plastic anymore, and I can't reliably position it in a comfortable way without the use of applicator. And I'm conscious now that I create more plastic waste, but I've had to make that trade-off for my own well-being and come to terms with that.
The majority of activism I've seen around disability and menstruation has been linked to endometriosis and PCOS, but I feel that there are other disabilities that are really being ignored within that narrative. So it's really great to have you speaking here today, Pippa, about other invisible disabilities and how they affect menstrual experience.
Yeah, I mean, all disability narratives are really important, and I think it's fantastic that charities are starting to really give space to the voices of people with PCOS and endometriosis. And I hope that the platform's also used to lift up other disability experiences too. And because of stigma and taboo around openly talking about periods, this is not something I've really discussed with other people, even though I'm frank and open about my experiences generally. I have no idea if I have any friends who have, you know, changed their use of menstrual products because of, you know, acquired illnesses or disabilities. And why isn't it that why don't we talk about this as openly as we talk about, oh, I made some changes to my diet because I became sensitive to this food stuff? It's just a kind of every day. It's just as normal.
Yeah, I experienced something very similar with So I have painful bladder syndrome, and I used to always use tampons, but because of where the tampon is positioned, it'd be pressing against the urethra quite a lot. So now I've switched to using pads again, and I have had people say to me like, "Oh, you use pads? That's quite sort of immature or childish," because it's what you start off with, I guess, when you first start your period. And I think that people don't think that there isn't just one size fits all. There's something that you personally works for you and fits for you, and as you say, you don't have to justify that. It's a personal experience, it's a personal thing. If you want to share it, amazing, because it brings us together, and it helps us to see that we're all different and we all require the same support and the same same support from society to make sure that we have the products that we need so that we can menstruate with dignity and how we choose to.
All our experiences are valid. There isn't a wrong way to have a period. There isn't a wrong way to cope with it, and particularly when you get the intersection of different stigmatized experiences, for example, life with a disability, or being LGBT or not white, you're layering these things that aren't seen as acceptable to talk about, or may have problems or prejudices associated with them. And for anyone who experiences those intersections, it's damaging in a lot of ways, and we need to open that dialogue up, and I hope we're able to do that.
That's an excellent point there, Pippa. It's so important that we approach periods in an intersectional way, because everyone's experience is so different. People are influenced by their cultural background, by their socioeconomic status, by their interpersonal relationships, by their religion, all sorts of different things. So it's really important to bring up the different intersecting aspects of people's identities.
One of the conversations that's becoming more mainstream is about mental health, and the experiences of mental illness and mental health are as diverse as any other experience. But of course, the link to menstruation, it can be quite challenging for people who have periods and already experience mental health problems, because periods can be accompanied by dysphoria, premenstrual syndrome. Some people can even experience psychosis, which might be delusions, hallucinations, and it can have a profound effect on an individual's mental health. And I think many of us who've experienced periods will have experienced some mood changes. And we're so used to the trivializing narrative of, well, she's just angry because she's on her period. This deeply, deeply woman-hating, misogynistic narrative that dates back a century or so to hysteria theory, which is
Freud.
So poisonous, but also serves to erase the experience of people with genuine mental health struggles, who may find that their periods exacerbate this. And if it's dismissed as, well, it's just something that women experience, they just get bad mood on their periods, they may be prevented from accessing healthcare support they need.
And women's pain is often trivialised as well. I think dating back centuries ago to the Bible, and like women automatically have pain. It's women's role to experience pain in childbirth and such forth.
Yeah. And it's an endemic problem that's been well documented that women have less successful outcomes when visiting healthcare providers, being disbelieved, having their symptoms dismissed, particularly as anxiety, because there's this expectation, this prejudice of the worrying woman, the hysteric woman. And as a result, women have consistently longer waits for diagnoses, and frequently disbelieved, and this leads to horrific waits for people with things like endometriosis and PCOS to be diagnosed, because they're women's issues, and a lot of doctors may not examine them with the same urgency, because it's kind of expected that you've got a period, therefore you should be in pain.
Absolutely,
just
that's
deal
such
with
a problematic narrative, because women are fed this narrative that periods are very painful. Therefore, it's hard for women to know actually what period is, in inverted commas, normal, and what period is a sign of something else. So actually, women aren't going to the doctor when they should be, because they think, well, this excessive pain is normal. When in fact,
and when they do go, they're often dismissed, and the gender of the doctor isn't always a predictor of that. I mean, I once saw a female doctor about painful periods when I was much younger, and she said, well, do you have clots? And I was, a teenager at this time. I said, I don't know. And she said, well, you'd know if you'd had them, you're fine, just, suck it up, deal with it, kind of thing. It turns out I had clots, I just didn't know what they were, and because she'd made this assumption of it's got to be really bad to be real, I suffered for a much longer time until I was given a contraceptive pill that was able to manage some of that discomfort. Turns out it's these sneezing out a jellyfish is pretty
that's lovely imagery there.
You're welcome. It's a really important discussion to have about how people with menstruation are dismissed. And when you've got a chronic condition which is already invisible and already may be dismissed or disbelieved, intersecting that with any menstrual problems is going to be really problematic. So when I was first diagnosed with fibromyalgia, the consultant rheumatologist who did so said, well, you could have 100 doctors in a room and 100 different opinions of whether it was real or not. And I thought that's a really helpful thing to tell me when you're diagnosing me with this condition, thanks. But it also kind of, it lays a substrate for your whole experience of that illness if you know that it's basically flip of a coin when you go to a health professional about whether or not they even think what you're experiencing is a real condition.
Same with chronic fatigue syndrome as well.
Exactly. And when you layer that together with the deeply prejudiced attitudes towards menstruation that have endured for over a century, then it's very difficult for a lot of people who have periods to access sufficient health.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think it's such, I won't say interesting, but it's horrible. A negative thing is this sort of intersection with the hysteria and the kind of idea of the woman being a warrior and an overreactor, and for that to be such a kind of clear narrative that so many people share, yet also there's this underlying thing of taboo and stigma of not actually being able to, for example, say the word vagina. I mean, everyone's very happy to say, oh, women experience hysteria, women are this, women are this. But then no one can actually say.
A story about people saying the word vagina that I will relay very quickly. So when I was lecturing a few years ago, I was teaching French Surrealism, and I had a group of students, and they needed to comment on this painting, and the painting included a woman, and there was a spear pointed towards her vulva. And I wanted to think about the imagery, what that spear meant, of course, of it being phallic, etc. So they're all talking about how it was phallic, and people said the word penis, no problem. And I said, but what is it pointing at? And they were like, And then I said, what is it pointing at? What is the name of the thing it's pointing at? And this girl just went, lady parts? And I said, can not one person in this room say the word vagina? I said, you're all between 21 and 22. And I said, right, we need to tackle this right now. So I got them all to say the word vagina. So every single one of the 20 of them said the word vagina each. And in the end, I said to them, right, we're going to say it together. And we said loudly, vagina.
Amazing.
And I said, does everyone feel better now? And they said, yes. But there was a man walking by and he heard this and he went,
Brilliant, brilliant. There does seem to be a real lack of education about the names for body parts, stereotypically female genitalia. And that is really important to have the vocabulary to talk about these things when you're going to a healthcare professional, but also when discussing it with peers. The distinction between the vulva and the vagina is very important. If you're saying, you know, if you're experiencing vulval itching, that's very different to if you're experiencing vaginal itching, because that's internal. And not having the appropriate vocabulary really limits people with that anatomy from accessing the support they need. And it's really important we talk about it and explain that the vulva is the external organs and the vagina is the internal passageway, and these are different.
And that lack of vocabulary really reinforces taboo as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. If we're always using euphemisms, we're underlining the social notion that it's something forbidden, something we shouldn't talk about, something we should be ashamed of.
Exactly. By using like menstrual euphemisms like time of the month or aunt flow. Yeah.
And those are helpful and be fun, but there's also nothing wrong with the real thing.
But also words like feminine hygiene as well are so problematic, because first of all, that's implying that all people have periods are women, which is not true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also implying that menstruators are dirty.
Yep.
So it reinforces that as well. And then
what's wrong with
hygiene products in supermarkets, and I find it really frustrating.
What's wrong with calling them period products?
Exactly.
They're products, they're for period.
Yeah.
And it's alliterative, and alliterative things are memorable. So it makes it sound like a superhero. Peter Parker, period product. I mean, you know, it's great. Not that I would advise using Spider-Man as a tampon, but he's probably quite absorbent with all that webbing. I'm sorry, Peter Parker. I'm sorry.
I'm sure he's very happy to be name checked.
I'm sure he would be a wonderful advocate for, you know, discussing menstruation openly if he were included in this discussion.
I think comic book hero menstrual products would be very cool. Maybe we should advocate that.
Yeah.
Oh, imagine that Wonder Woman maxi pad.
Yeah.
Yes.
That sounds fierce.
Yeah.
Iron Man tampons. Those things would be sturdy.
For people who have anemia, especially useful.
Yeah, exactly.
Captain America.
That could work. That could genuinely work. We might think of including that within some kind of booklet or something.
Although, to be honest, we should probably go for Captain Marvel, because she is
she is fierce.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, and naturally, Scarlet Witch. We wouldn't want to miss her out.
Maybe she could have a period pants range.
Oh, that would be amazing. I mean, we've all got period pants. I mean, the discussion of clothing is particularly pertinent when you've got chronic illness, because it's not trivial deciding what you're going to wear. If you've got fibromyalgia, for example, you may experience something called allodynia, which is where other sensations like pressure feel like pain. So if you wear clothing that's a little bit too tight or a little bit too rough, it can be really excruciatingly painful. And you've got to put a lot of thought into what clothes you wear, where the labels are, if there's lace around the edge. If you then add into that bloating, cramping, you know, all the other experiences of menstruation that we all know and love, then it makes even period pants complicated. And what do you wear when you're on your period and you've got all these issues? Oh, it's exhausting even to work that out, especially if you've got to be presentable to the public. Because I love my sweatpants, but I don't always love people to see me in them.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the good thing about everything being online at the moment, is you only have to be this section ready.
Oh, yeah. You have no idea what fantastic pajama bottoms I'm wearing today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it's very liberating to be able to talk about all these things so openly. And there's so many aspects of the experience that have gone unsaid. right down to contraception. What may seem like, a straightforward decision for many people becomes infinitely more complicated when you're layering it with the experience of chronic illness. The phenomenon of side effects with hormonal contraception is something we could talk about at length, I'm sure.
Yes.
And the fact that it seems acceptable for people with periods to have quite significant side effects just for this privilege of being able to have contraception. But if you're experiencing chronic illness, you've got to take that into account beforehand. You've got to think, well, I already experience chronic migraines perhaps, so I need to know not to choose a combined pill. What if your doctor never tells you that a combined pill has risk of migraines and you definitely shouldn't take it if you already have migraines, and you take it for 5 years and have excruciating headaches, and doctors do tests and ask you lots of questions, and no one says, well, you're on a combined pill and that has risk of migraines and maybe you should come off it. And yeah, that was a delightful experience. The lack of
experience.
Yeah.
Because I was put on the combined pill for a year and I wasn't even asked before I was put on it, do you have migraines? And then I started to have worse migraines on it. And then when I went to the doctor and they said, how have you been the past year? I said, I've had really bad migraines. And they said to me, well, you shouldn't have been put on the combined pill then. You should be on the progesterone only. I was like, oh, thanks for telling me that now. Like, I've got the literature, but who reads that tiny booklet?
No, it's not accessible to read it.
No, I actually can't read it. It's
any visual impairment. And it's unbelievable how poor the communication is about the consequences and side effects. And it seems to be just an acceptable risk, but when you already have health impacts, what might be an acceptable risk for an able-bodied person just becomes life-changing. I mean, writing off 2-3 days out of every 28-day period to a migraine is just when your days you already have limited time to do things in because of energy levels, it has a real impact. And there's things like planning. Not everyone can remember to reliably take a pill at the same time every day. If you have a condition that may cause vomiting, then you may be limited in being able to take the pill because it can't reliably work if you throw it up quickly. Reversibility, if you do experience side effects that impact you badly, not all contraception is immediately reversible, like the injection, for example. I had to consider what contraception to go on a while ago, and I was quite interested in something that was longer lasting and I wouldn't have to think about, because as you may know, things like anxiety even can impact on your memory. And the last thing you want to worry about when you've got anxiety is, shit, have I missed my pill? Have I had potentially unsafe sex? On top of everything else you're dealing with. But hormonal contraceptives can have an effect on people's mood. And it's not easily predictable all the time, who it will have an effect on. And it can be quite trial and error. And I was, interested in maybe trying the implant, but at the time, I was well enough to play a contact sport. And there's not really a lot of information about playing a contact sport with a hormonal contraceptive implant, because guess who they expect to play contact sports?
Men.
Yes.
But it's only until recently they started studying the menstrual cycles of female athletes. That's been a super recent phenomenon.
I was literally just about to say that, and I just there's been all these articles where it's like, did you know that the menstrual cycle can actually affect your performance as a footballer? And it's like,
no shit.
I've known that since I was 10.
Well, I think we've talked for a long time, but I was wondering if we could just sort of move on a bit to talk about a period sort of focused recommendation. I don't know whether you guys had any ideas as to perhaps a Instagram influencer or a book or an academic piece even that's related to menstruation or chronic illness, invisible illness, something that our audience might want to engage with further. Is there anything that you guys typically go to access those kind of materials?
I mean, I guess as I've been talking about the spoon theory, I would love for people to read more about that, because my explanation may not have been particularly well articulated or understandable to everyone. There are diagrams, there are people who explain it in terms of, it's like your spell slots when you play D&D, or the recharging battery on your phone. Different people have different metaphors that work for them for communicating their experience of living with invisible illnesses and chronic illnesses. And so looking up the spoon theory, or the term spoonie, SPOONIE, can be a really helpful gateway to finding out the experiences of people who live with these conditions.
Amazing.
I think it's really hard for me to pick one thing, because obviously I've done a lot of academic texts around periods. I'd recommend the work of Jane Ussher and Chris Boble. Jane Ussher wrote this fantastic book, I think it was 2006, called Managing the Monstrous Feminine, and she really gets into societal discourses around menstruation and how they're influenced by like negative patriarchal perceptions. So that's really great. And in terms of social media activism, there's loads of wonderful work being done out there. I suppose if I could recommend one, I'll recommend, because she's Sheffield based, Chella Quint, who started the period positive movement. So if you're interested in that, you can just look up period positive on Twitter and find Chella's social media account, and she'd like people to read her charter, and if you agree to the terms of the charter, you can use her hashtag period positive hashtag. So for example, she talks about using appropriate language and being inclusive.
Yeah, she's wonderful. I think this is probably a very general one that lots of people know of. There's this fantastic YouTuber called Hannah Witten, and she does a lot of discussion on menstruation, puberty, contraception, sex, and everything in between. And she has recently got a stoma, and it really goes into detail about her experience with periods and sex with a stoma. And it's incredibly interesting. I think it's, as you say, with the spoon theory, it's a real gateway into understanding what that's like for someone, to have someone really pull the blanket down and just talk with no qualms. So yeah, Hannah Witten, I definitely recommend that for sure. And then the last thing is, we've got our red seat, which is going to be like the hot seat, but obviously red. And we want everyone, us three, to answer 5 questions about their period, basically. So the first question is, do you remember your first period? And if you do, what was it like?
I'm pretty sure my first period was on a ferry to France. I mean, it's all very well to say the bloody French, but it was quite literally. And it was fine. I knew what it was, and I think my mum passed me a tampon under the stall door, which was very uncomfortable to use. I didn't know how to use it properly. But I had my first period in international waters, so...
I'm not sure many people can say that. How about you, Maria?
I don't remember it that well. I can't remember if I was 9 or 10. I was quite young, and I was one of the youngest in my school to get their period, and none of my friends had started yet. So I was kind of like, I remember being a bit annoyed about it, to be honest. I thought this is massively inconvenient. And
it is.
I don't remember there being the facilities at my junior school for menstruators. I can't remember whether it was adequately provided. I feel like it wasn't back then.
Mm.
How about you, Acushla?
I was kind of the opposite of you, Maria, in that I was later and I got my first period when I was 14. And I was coming towards the end of year 9, and I remember I was sat at lunch and one of my friends, can you believe there's people in our year who haven't started their period yet? And I was like, oh no, I'm the only one. But funnily enough, I actually had my first period in France. Same as you. Yeah, I was on holiday with a friend, and I was with her and her family, and I started my period, but luckily she had already started when she was much younger, and I knew that, and also her parents were doctors, so I felt like I was in quite a safe space to talk about it, but it was very strange sort of not having like my older sister there she would probably be the first person that I would go to be like, what is this? So that was quite unusual, kind of experiencing that with someone else's family rather than my own. But yeah, that was my sort of first experience, which, yeah, I do remember it. And then the second question is, what's your preferred period product?
Well, I've discovered that Aldi supermarket do applicator tampons with cardboard applicators and paper wrappers. They don't always work as smoothly as the plastic ones from most brands. But for me, that's a happy medium between accessibility, I can use it comfortably, and not feeling too worried about the sustainability of the product. And I find them comfortable as well.
Amazing.
So that's, Aldi's own brand.
That's good advice.
How about you, Maria?
It's really difficult to say because I've not really had a period for about 12 years. It makes me feel very unqualified to talk about a period. I'm constantly talking about them and I don't have that much memory of them because it's been such a long time, thanks for being on the pill for all these years. But I think, thinking back then, it was probably tampons, actually. I just found them really convenient.
Well, you played a lot of sport, didn't you?
Yeah, someone that plays sport. I think when I used to play football, because I still had my period when I played for the county, because it was before I was 18. I used to wear tampons and pads because we wore white shorts, and I was always a bit worried about like leaking.
Well, I used to play rugby, and I can't imagine wearing a pad playing rugby. I mean, I know some people must have done. But a lot of things get moved around and a lot of body parts find themselves in a lot of strange places in a ruck, as I'm sure you can imagine. And the internal nature of a tampon made it for me the preferable choice. I don't remember any discussion about it. There must have been, but in rugby, in women's rugby particularly, there's very much the attitude of whatever pain you're in, you take it, you carry on. And I think that probably applied to period discomfort as well as everything else. Your legs hanging off, walk it off. I mean, the hilarious thing I always find about,
I said this as a football fan,
the backwards attitudes towards women playing sport is, if we think about it, male genitalia are far more vulnerable and delicate. I mean, ovaries are pretty well protected. You'd have to have some pretty good aim to do any damage. But there's well-reported stories about men rupturing testicles during rugby matches. So maybe those poor delicate gentlemen shouldn't play these rough sports, and it should be left to the stronger gender.
Definitely.
This is, of course, to completely make things binary, but there are, of course, people with all genitals of all genders.
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of my preferred period product, I do prefer pads.
That discussion, sorry.
Back to that. I used to use tampons a lot when I was younger because I used to swim quite a lot. But now I just prefer pads because I find them comfortable. I think when I do sports, I would prefer to wear a tampon. Just it's more secure. You just feel like everything's going to be in the place that you want it to be. But yeah, I much prefer that. But I think I'm very lucky in the sense that I have relatively light periods, and some people don't have that option. So I know that that's kind of a privilege that I experience. And then the third question is to talk about a memorable period, or something that made you laugh, or something that made you cry, just something memorable within your sort of menstrual experience.
I mean, like you, I've had experience with IBS.
Yeah.
And I'm sure many of us who have periods will know the delight that is the period poo, which is an aspect that isn't talked about even as much as any of the other delightful aspects of periods. But when you've got IBS, it can be a singular experience. IBS can come with, constipation or diarrhea or both. It can come with mucus in your stools. It can also include bleeding. And more than once, I found myself looking down thinking, well, I don't know which hole I'm bleeding from. It could be one other or both. So, lucky dip, who knows? So yeah, the excitement and fun that comes with having IBS and your period at the same time.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, it's real. It's real.
Yeah, I think many people experience that with IBS. I know I have a lot of friends who suffer with IBS, and their periods, they both make each other worse. So you'll have IBS cramps, which then causes menstrual cramps, and the menstrual cramps cause the IBS cramps. Yeah, they're very related because they're in the same kind of ballpark, I guess.
Ballpark, yes.
Same abdominal region.
Plumbing.
Yes, exactly. And how about you,
We're
Maria?
not using euphemisms. We're not.
Oh no.
So I think what springs to mind is not about period I've experienced, but more the academic work I've done talking about periods. So a few years ago, I gave a paper at a conference. It was about representations of periods in French literature. And I came after a paper that was about child abuse that was really traumatizing. And the audience had been, watching that, and had been, didn't appear to be traumatized by it or anything. We're just kind of listening to it. And then I came and talked about periods, and the audience most of the audience looked very uncomfortable. This was back in 2015, I think it was, or maybe 2016. And I was giving this paper and talking about this novel in which this character, it's a French novel called Baise-moi by Virginie Despentes. It's a really great read. I'd recommend it. I don't know if it's been translated. I'm assuming it probably has. And this character is kind of really embracing her period, and she is on the bathroom floor, on the floor in a hotel, and she's bleeding onto the floor, and she's covering herself in her own menstrual blood as a kind of like a cleansing ritual, and it's like a celebration of like life and femininity, etc. And I was just talking about this, and the audience was horrified. And I just kind of broke for a moment, like kind of broke character, and came out of the paper. And I said to the audience, why are you all so shocked? I said, I'm looking out at you and you look really disturbed by this. I said, we've had a lot of papers today with genuinely disturbing content, but all I'm doing is talking about a normal bodily experience. And I said, this really goes to tell that there's still so much stigma around this topic, even though you're a group of academics who are used to talking about difficult subjects. And I'm talking about something very normal, and you've all got an issue with it. So I kind of gave them a little bit of a telling off.
That's really interesting.
It was a mostly male audience.
Yeah.
So that would be, and I think also 2015, 2016, that's sort of when the movement in the UK is only just coming in.
Yeah, it was.
I think
my audience
more
was very
used to
shocked by it.
now. Yeah, I think something that sticks in my mind, which is actually quite similar to yours, Maria, is that I was teaching in a school about menstrual education, and there was this teacher, a male teacher there, and he didn't know why I was there, and I said, I'm here to talk about periods, and he was like, oh, so which period? And I was like, menstrual periods, like bleeding periods. And he was like,
you meant like the Georgian times or the Victorian
yes.
times?
He thought that I meant historical periods of time. And I was like, no, just periods in general. And I'd never experienced that before, someone who really just completely misunderstood what I was trying to say, and who actually thought of historical periods before a menstrual period.
Oh yes,
yeah, so
the Red Age.
yeah, the bleeding period.
Yes, he is known for the floods.
Yeah.
The Great Flood of 1428.
Which was really strange, but
that is
interesting
story. I've had some reactions when I've spoken about, not that similar, but I had I gave a paper about the menopause a few years ago about its representation in literature again, and it was most to a female audience who seemed to be really enjoying and appreciating it. But at the end of it, the one man in the audience put his hand up and he said, I have a question. I said, oh, great. And he said, why menopause? Like, why are you talking about that? Like, what interest does that have? He's like, what's the point? And I said to him, look around you. This is a room full of women, most of whom are older than 50. And they just went for it and they were not happy.
I feel like menopause is kind of the next thing that we need to start talking about. I feel like periods would just break the ice there. But I think menopause especially is something that I know that when I experience it, I want to be ready. I want to know what it's about. I want to know what's happening to my body, the same that I did with puberty. I think it should be, education should be there for it as well.
Yeah, there is much less about menopause in media than there is menstruation. Menopause,
or even erectile dysfunction, gets talked about more.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Aging in women is such a massively stigmatized part of life, which is ridiculous because
patriarchal valorization of youth.
I know, but I can't get my head around this fact that aging is a privilege. To manage to live when you could have died younger is a gift. So to reach menopause is something that we should be proud of and grateful for and talking about as, the next transition in life.
Absolutely. And yet it's even more taboo than periods.
Yeah.
And the theory behind that is it's because periods is a young woman's experience and
mark of fertility, and that's what a woman is useful for.
Exactly,
she said sarcastically. And it's, you see this erasure of older women in media so much. The love interest of the 57-year-old hero in the movie is 30 years old or whatever, and we really need to start lifting up the voices of women older than ourselves who have a lifetime of experience of not just periods but also menopause.
Yeah, shout out to the Menopause Cafe there. They're doing really great work bringing together women with menopause across the country to share their own experiences, and I think they have cafes in a lot of different cities now.
I'd like to visit one. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, I met I can't remember her name. I met someone at a conference who is very instrumental in the menopause cafes, and she told me all about them because I said, I've done some research on the menopause, and it's even more absent in the media and in literature than menstruation. During my PhD, for example, I was able to analyse 20 or 30 novels about periods, but I only found 5 in literature from France, Algeria, and Mauritius that mentioned the menopause. On that note, there's a wonderful book by Ananda Devi called Indian Tango, which I know is in translation, and that is a wonderful kind of celebration of the menopause. So that's a really positive perspective on menopause that I'd recommend reading.
And it's worth bearing in mind that chronic conditions, illnesses and disabilities increase in rate as we get older. So the older you are, the more likely you are to have another condition. So the fact of the matter is, most people going through menopause will be more likely to have additional issues than people experiencing periods at a younger age. And it's even more vital that we talk about the intersection of menstruation and chronic illnesses as we listen to the dialogues of older people.
Excellent point there.
Absolutely. And then I guess going on to question 4, which is what is your worst PMS symptom? What is your sort of, you think that's the one that I experienced, which is the worst?
Well, the headaches are bad, really bad. But it's the thigh cramps that really get me. Just the whole leg just locking up in sickening agony that means you can't walk and you can't curl up and you can't lie down and everything hurts and sitting on the toilet hurts and standing up hurts and lying down hurts and it's not pleasant.
No, it doesn't sound it.
No, not at all. No, for me it's similar. It's cramps. Like, even though I've not had a period in a long time, on the pill I still get symptoms. I still get cramps and headaches and that kind of thing. So I'd have to say it was cramps. Yeah.
Where do you get the cramps? Do you get them abdominally?
My side. In the front, on the side. So I didn't actually recognize them as menstrual cramps for a long time. And I went to the doctor about them and I said, I'm having these cramps, and she said, are you sure they're not menstrual cramps? I said, but I've not had a period in years. And she said, oh, on the pill you can still have like menstrual cramp symptoms. And I said, but the cramps I used to have weren't in that area. She says, oh well, with the pill it may have changed that.
Which goes back to our discussion earlier about the potential side effects and effects of contraception not being communicated to us.
Yeah, but I was
you
fortunate
were on it for years and didn't know that.
The doctor, she was wonderful. She took me very seriously and she said, I think it's menstrual cramps, but let's give you an ultrasound, just check up on you, make sure it's not something else. And it wasn't, so that was good.
That is good. I think that mine's probably the headaches and migraines, because I get migraines anyway, and they are so debilitating. I'm lucky that I haven't had one. I don't think this year I've had one yet. But when I do have one, it wipes you out for like 3 days.
Well, I didn't understand for a long time that my period was linked to my headaches, because my headache started 48 hours before my period every single time, which is a nice little predictor if your periods are irregular. But if headaches aren't talked about as a symptom of menstruation, then how would you know? It's just all of these symptoms, from the mood changes and mental health issues that some people get associated with their cycle, to the physical symptoms, the digestive and the headaches, the bloating, the cramping. All of these need to be talked about so that we know what we're looking for and we know what we're experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then our last question is, what's the funniest euphemism for a period that you have heard of?
Well, this isn't so much for a period, but there's a wonderful piece of terminology, earning your red wings, which is a euphemism for having sex whilst on your period. I just think it's like, it's a badge of honor. It's like, oh yes, I flew. I really like that because there's something kind of heroic and uplifting about it, earning your red wings. Maria,
it's have a very kind of like positive connotation, doesn't it?
What about you? What's your favourite term, Maria?
That's a really difficult question. I actually don't have a favourite term because as an academic, I always try and kind of, in my articles, use the most kind of neutral term possible. So I'm always using menstruation. Even periods is kind of like slightly informal. So I use the words menstruation a lot. So I'm actually just going to say menstruation because it's gender neutral. It's not pejorative. It doesn't reflect kind of like negative stereotypes about periods, although it is a bit kind of like scientific and impersonal.
Yeah, I think that it's my favorite is the one that we were speaking about the last time we spoke, which is Shark Week. I think that's the funniest.
It's like, oh, there's blood in the water.
yeah, exactly. But I think maybe it's just because I'm very like geographical and I like animals and I like David Attenborough documentaries and stuff. So Shark Week, that's my favourite for sure.
Oh, David Attenborough, I hope he's well at the moment.
Oh gosh, don't.
We need him. Amazing. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for coming to this conversation and being so open and comfortable with us, because I know that I know that you two are friends, but I'm sort of new to you guys, and I feel like we've shared so much and been really honest and open, and thank you so much for that. I think it's going to help so many people. So yeah, thank you.
And thank you to Irise as well, because this is such a fantastic project, and I just want to see periods just talked about more and more, and the more we speak about them, the more normal it will become, and the more ready people will be to go to speak to doctors about their menstrual health if they need to, or just the more confident they'll feel. So it's such a great thing to do.
And thank you so much for inviting me. It's fantastic to be given an opportunity to talk about some of the issues that are so often invisible and hidden behind layers of stigma. And the more we can talk about the intersecting difficulties people have, the better for people experiencing them. And I am really looking forward to the rest of this series of podcasts and learning what other people experience. So thank you so much for having me.
Great. Well, thank you, Pippa. It's been really wonderful to hear your point of view and to have a representation of invisible disabilities, even if you don't speak for everyone.
It has been quite a mouthful to say that.
Maybe we should come up with a more simple term.
Yeah, a more accessible term would be great.
Is there a sign language equivalent of invisible disability? Do you know it?
You'd probably have hidden disability, but I would defer to a deaf person on their knowledge of BSL.
Okay, amazing. So our next podcast is going to be about menstruation in the media. So this is very much Maria's forte, I think. And we're going to have some really wonderful women coming. Sophia Liu, who created the Everybody Bleeds video, and also some amazing young women from the Red Cloud Project are going to be with us. And so we will be talking about the interpretations of menstruation in the media. We'll be talking about period memes, all those funny things. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. So thank you so much, everyone.